All right, class. So obviously, the person that we attribute most of evolutionary theory to is Charles Darwin. So in the next lecture or two, we're going to talk some about Charles Darwin, along with another person named Alfred Wallace, who's biologically, like for real in the biology world, is kind of an equal to Charles Darwin, but kind of everyday people, normal society sort of thing. Like nobody knows Alfred Wallace, but people have heard of Charles Darwin. So I wanted to take a minute and kind of tell you some pre-Darwinian ideas. Okay, so before we start talking about, what did Darwin think, how, what led him to believe those things, and how does it work? I want to tell you some ways that it was before then. All right, so we'll start with back in like Greek philosopher days, so time of Plato. So in those times, and really even up into early 1800s, so this is most of the pre-Darwinian time. The primary idea on life about life on Earth is something called species fixity. So species fixity is basically telling us, like if you look at it, it's like the species are fixed, right? Which sort of implies nothing is changing, right? So all species have always been here. So here meaning Earth, right, on the planet. All species have always been here, and then all species will always be here. Okay, so that's the species fixity idea, right? Like nothing with those species is changing. The stuff we see today on our planet, and think about this for a second, like for real, take a minute to think about this. So if you go outside, all the living things you see, all the plants, all the animals, all of that stuff, we would, if we believed in species fixity, we would be telling ourselves that that particular type of bird has literally been here since the creation of the earth and will always be here, period. And this would include, as long as there's a planet, everything living on it is not going to change, right? And I'm not talking about change like we mentioned with biological evolution. So I'm talking about like the composition, right? What's actually here will never change. All right, so the problems with these ideas, now in biology, and we'll talk more about this really next week, but all species have always been here. So that would imply that there's no biological changes, right? So like fossil record stuff where we say things like birds evolved from this group of dinosaurs, right? So that kind of stuff can't happen if we're following species fixity, because nothing new is developing on its own. Like everything has been here. Nothing new can just show up like that. And then all species will always be here. Well, we hear all the time about extinctions, right? And now, because of some human interference, like sometimes things can even go extinct in our lifetime. Normally, like in the fossil record, we're talking about millions and millions of years for something to go extinct, but nowadays, which is really sad, but in our lifetime of 100 years or less, there are things that can go extinct. So we kind of know some stuff already that tells us this really can't be true. But I always say, we got to put ourselves in the position of, being alive back in those days, Plato's time, and then into 1500s or 1700s, whatever time frame you pick. I mean, this was just the prevailing thought. It's just the normal thing that people believed was this idea of species fixity. Hey, and then in 1700s, like 1700s leading into the 1800s, This person named Lamarck, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, he came up with this idea about how organisms change to their environment. Okay, so, this was kind of one of the early ideas that organisms adapt to their environment, right? And that's a big part of biological evolution today. So there's actually nothing wrong with this idea biologically, because organisms are adapting to their environment. Now, the problem with what Lamarck did is when he created his mechanism, okay, when he developed the idea of like, why are these things, like what's causing these things to adapt, he called it inheritance. Sorry, I guess my hand made my pen go over there. Inheritance of acquired characters. Inheritance of acquired characters. Doesn't sound like all that bad of an idea, but the problem is this. The problem is acquired, right? Because things that we acquire have no genetic predisposition, right? So this acquired idea would tell us that it's not genetic, right? So think, for example, if we're doing this with humans, think about if you have a person who goes to the gym every day and they constantly lift weights and they have big gigantic muscles. When they have children, that doesn't mean their children are going to automatically have big giant muscles, right? So the muscles, big muscles, would be an acquired character, not based on genetics. So that can't be inherited, right? Genes are what get inherited. So for the inheritance idea, it's got to be genetic. All right, so that's the idea, the deal of organisms adapting to their environment. That's a good idea, but the mechanism of they're doing that based on inheriting acquired character is just not true. And Lamarck's like classic example, what he looked at was with giraffes. So, what he was mentioning was that you've got these giraffes and they're trying to eat leaves that are up high on the trees here. So the ones that could stretch and reach those higher leaves were the ones that were more successful. And then you ended up creating, like within a lifetime is what this is talking about. Like this is one organism over here, one giraffe, that in its lifetime was able to stretch out its neck and then pass that on to its offspring. Right, so his classic acquired character was the length of necks in a giraffe. Okay, so again, not genetic, right? If it's doing something, if it's acquiring it in its lifetime, it can't be genetic, which means it's not going to matter for evolution and natural selection. All right, so this is kind of where we're at heading into Darwin and Wallace and natural selection is like some people, some naturalists starting to think this idea that organisms are adapting to their environment, but still trying to figure out why and how that's working. Okay, so that's where we're at heading into Darwin and Wallace.